Hello, everyone. Today we're starting with a deeply moving story. It's about a young woman, dismissed as useless and sold off by her own father and brother. Just when it seemed her fate was sealed, an Apache hunter appeared, and that moment began her journey toward dignity and true self-worth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always wonderful to see friends tuning in from all over the world. Now, let's begin this journey together. The summer sun bore down hard on Laramie, Wyoming territory in the year of 1879. The streets stank of horse sweat, stale whiskey, and the dust that never seemed to settle. Wagons rattled over ruts. Men in sweat-stained vests leaned against hitching posts with cards in their hands and lies on their tongues. The railroad had carved its way through town, bringing with it gamblers, drifters, and the kind of men who knew how to take more than they gave. For most folks, Laramie was a stopover, a place to gamble, to drink, to strike a bargain in the back room of a saloon. For Lila Hensley, 24 years old, it was a prison made of splintered walls and cruel voice. Her mother had died when she was only a girl, leaving her with a father and older brother who valued whiskey and cards more than kin. Jonas Hensley, her father, was a tall, hard man with a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. He was known at the tables for his temper and the way he could lie about his debts until someone pressed a revolver to his gut. Her brother Tom followed in his shadow, smaller in build, but quicker to sneer, always eager to remind Lila that she was nothing but extra weight on the wagon. She cooked, she scrubbed, she mended clothes until her fingers bled. But no matter how hard she worked, she was told the same thing: "You're worth nothing." She'd heard it so often it began to ring in her skull like a hammer on iron. That day, Jonas's luck had soured once more. He'd lost big at the Brass Lantern, a saloon thick with tobacco smoke and cheap talk. The pot was stacked against him, and the men at the table wanted their due. Jonas, desperate, cast his eyes toward his daughter. "Got something better in coin," he said, spitting into the sawdust floor. "Got a girl. Strong back, not much else, but she'll fetch her keep." Lila froze where she stood, clutching the tray of mugs she had just collected. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the men must surely hear it. Tom smirked, leaning back in his chair. "She's 24 and still unwed. Too proud, too sharp-tongued. But she can work like a mule if you don't mind the mouth." Laughter rolled around the table, coarse and sharp. The dealer, a red-faced foreman named Miles Rankin, licked his lips. He was a railroad man, heavy in the gut, his fingers fat and ringed with silver. He leaned forward, eyes crawling over Lila as though she were livestock. "I'll take her," Rankin said, tossing a handful of coins onto the table. "More than she's worth, truth be told. Girl like that belongs in a tent outside the camps, warming beds and hauling water." The room erupted with jeers. Men slapped their knees, amused at the cruelty of it. Lila stood rigid, her hands tight around the tray, though her knuckles turned white. She would not give them the pleasure of seeing her break. But inside, shame and fury twisted together. She wanted to scream, to claw her way free. Yet when she looked at her father, she saw nothing but relief in his eyes, as if discarding her was a favor to him. Then the doors of the saloon creaked open, and silence cut through the room. A tall man stepped inside. His buckskin shirt was worn from years in the weather. A satchel made of rawhide hung heavy on his shoulder, and a bowie knife rode at his hip. His skin bore the bronze of the high plains sun, his black hair tied at the nape. Most in town called men like him savages under their breath. But none dared say it too loud, not when he creed himself with that kind of quiet certainty. It was Gus, an Apache hunter who came down from the hills now and again to trade hides for powder, walt, or iron tools. He was younger than most, expected only 27, but his eyes, shaded beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat, seemed older than stone. The crowd shifted uneasily as he walked, each bootfall slow and steady. He stopped at the table where Rankin's coins still gleamed. Jonas narrowed his eyes. "What do you want, Injun?" Gus did not answer right away. Instead, he slid the satchel from his shoulder and set it down with a heavy thud. From it, he drew a folded pelt broad, soft, the hide of a winter buffalo, worth more than Rankin's silver combined. He laid it flat upon the table. "If she is no use to you," Gus said at last, his voice low, measured, "then I'll take her." The room stilled. Rankin barked out a laugh. "What trade a buffalo skin for that? You can have her, Hunter, though she'll cost you your sanity." Jonas leaned forward, spittle shining at the corner of his mouth. "She's yours then. One less mouth to feed." But Gus wasn't looking at Jonas, nor at Rankin. His gaze was fixed on Lila. He saw the fury burning behind her eyes, the way she held herself straight, despite the weight pressing down on her. Not pleading, not begging, defiant. "You can walk," Gus said softly to her. "Or you can come with me. Your choice." The words struck her harder than any slap her father had ever given. Choice. No man had ever offered her that. The crowd waited, hungry for drama. Some laughed, others muttered that it was a fool's game. Lila's heart thundered. For a breath she thought she might faint. But then she set the tray down, wiped her trembling hand on her skirt, and lifted her chin. "I'll go," she said. Her voice did not shake. Rankin swore, Jonas sputtered, Tom cursed under his breath. But none stopped her as she walked past them, past the coins, past her father's sea-stool. Gus turned without another word, holding the saloon doors open for her. Together they stepped out into the blinding sun. The street had gone quiet. A few miners leaned against the posts, watching. A boy paused with a bucket of water in his hands. Even the horses seemed to sense something had shifted. Lila did not look back. She would not give her father or brother the sight of her tears. She only saw the wide horizon, the trail cutting west, and the man beside her who had given her, for the first time in her life, the right to decide. They reached his horse, a sturdy bay, with a scar along its flank. Gus lifted the satchel and tied it behind the saddle. He swung up with an easy grace, then offered his hand. Lila hesitated only a moment. Then she placed her palm in his and climbed up behind him. "Where are we going?" she asked. Gus nudged the horse forward, out of town, toward the far line of the mountains that stood like dark sentinels against the sky. "Home," he said simply. And with that, the dust of Laramie fell behind them, and the first step of Lila's new life began. The trail out of Laramie wound north and west, a ribbon of dust that stretched toward the dark ridges of the Medicine Bow. By the time the town's clamor faded behind them, the only sound left was the steady rhythm of hooves on hard ground and the low creak of leather straps. Lila sat astride behind Gus, her hands uncertain on the saddle. The sun baked her back, and the wind whipped strands of hair across her face. She kept her eyes on the line of his shoulders, broad, steady, unmoving. He did not speak. At first the silence gnawed at her. She wanted to demand answers. Why had he done this? What did he expect of her? What kind of man trades a buffalo hide for a woman? But the longer she watched the way he rode, the steadiness of his hands on the reins, the calm in his posture, the more the questions tangled inside her throat. Finally, when the heat pressed too heavy, she dared whisper, "Why?" For a long while, she thought he hadn't heard. Then, without turning, Gus said, "Because you looked like you wanted out." Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected such a plain truth. They rode on. Grass gave way to open flats, where antelope bounded in the distance, their white rumps flashing bright against the sage. Hawks wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the wide sky. With each mile, the town seemed less real, like a bad dream she'd finally woken from. But fear crept in alongside relief. She clutched her skirts and tried to steady her breath. What if she'd only stepped from one prison into another? By late afternoon, Gus drew the horse to a halt near a shallow creek. The water glimmered in the light, thin and fast over smooth stones. He swung down easily, then offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it, sliding to the ground. Her legs trembled from the ride, but she stood straight. Gus knelt by the creek, filled a tin cup, and handed it to her. "Drink." Lila lifted it slowly, the water cold and sharp on her tongue. She realized she hadn't had a sip since morning. When she lowered the cup, Gus was already refilling it for himself. He didn't drink first, she noticed. He'd made sure she had her fill before him. That small courtesy stung her eyes, more than the dust ever had. They ate jerky in silence, sitting on the creek's bank. Gus chewed slow, gaze fixed on the line of trees ahead, as if he could see farther than the land allowed. Lila nibbled her piece, the salt harsh on her lips, and stole glances at him. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his jaw dark with stubble.